Kevin Costner has spoken. Fans were shocked by what he revealed. He was the target of silent inquiries and rumors for years, from his most well-known parts to the relationships he maintained behind the scenes. According to him, a fact has now surfaced that nobody anticipated. Was it a secret love, a personal grievance, or something more profound that he kept to himself? He made an unexpected, heartfelt, and unavoidable revelation that had many wondering long after the incident was over. The nearly non-existent bodyguard. The bodyguard is nearly usually the first thing that comes to mind when people think of Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner. The 1992 romantic thriller, which paired a Hollywood celebrity with a world-renowned musician in an unconventional love tale, became one of the decade's pivotal pictures. However, the majority of people are unaware of how nearly the film was never created. Like the romance it depicted, its path to the cinema was tumultuous. Kevin Costner was at the heart of that adventure, and he wouldn't let it end. Lawrence Kasdan, who would go on to write masterpieces like The Big Chill and The Empire Strikes Back, wrote the initial script for The Bodyguard in the 1970s. The project was initially not written for Houston or Costner. It was envisioned as a vehicle for Steve McQueen and Diana Ross. On paper, the idea was straightforward yet captivating. A great singer is hounded by a devoted admirer, and the stoic bodyguard who defends her ends up falling in love with her. Hollywood, however, wasn't prepared. The script was rejected over 60 times by studios, who said it was too risky, impractical, or just not commercial enough. The Bodyguard collected dust for over 10 years. The project was seen as cursed even as Kevin Costner's career began to take off in the late 1980s. However, when Costner published Dances with Wolves in 1990, everything was different. In addition to making him one of the most marketable celebrities in the world, the movie demonstrated to Hollywood that he had the foresight and clout to effect change. After years of neglect, a script suddenly found a new champion. It was rather obvious to Costner when he made the decision to proceed with The Bodyguard. He desired a relationship with Whitney Houston. Houston, a superstar with an unrivaled voice, was the most powerful name in music at the time. However, she had never taken action before, and it wasn't a good idea to place her under a lot of scrutiny for such a prominent part. Her lack of experience worried the executives. Some even questioned whether viewers would be open to seeing a black lady opposite a white Hollywood celebrity in a major romance role. That circle of what-ifs was utterly absurd to Costner. Though it wasn't an easy chore, he called Kasdan that night and declared, "This girl is perfect, and I'm going to prove it." Whitney was opposed to it from the beginning. Although she was interested in performing, she was afraid that harsh critics would discredit her before she had a chance to establish her worth. In addition, she was afraid that she simply couldn't handle it. For someone who had dominated the music charts, entering a movie set felt like an exposure she would not be able to handle. "I felt she had something in her that no one else could give to that role," Costner said, making it a point to call her immediately. He promised to stand by her side, help her along the way, and shield her from the mockery she feared. Whitney still required a little encouragement. She needed time to reflect. She eventually consented to at least do a screen test, though, because of the genuineness and emotion in Costner's voice. This choice marked the start of one of the most famous collaborations in movie history. Without Costner's persistence, the film most likely would not have been made or would have had a completely different appearance. He wasn't just any actor working on a project. He was the driving force behind the project's creation. When The Bodyguard debuted in 1992, critics gave it mixed reviews, but moviegoers were enthralled, and the film eventually brought in over $400 million at the box office worldwide. One of the best-selling soundtracks ever created was even born out of it. All of that would not have been possible if Kevin Costner hadn't stolen the script, which included Whitney's performance of "I Will Always Love You" as one of its main pillars. But had such strong faith in Whitney's performance, the next step was just getting started. Whitney's fears would eventually be revealed in a way that almost put the movie out of its existence. Behind the scenes, Whitney's insecurities resurfaced, despite the world seeing a stunning success. The event that almost cost her the role before production had started was the most obvious example. Whitney's difficulties on the screen test. Even though Whitney Houston was the world's largest music artist in the early 1990s, her confidence virtually vanished when she entered the acting industry. Warner Brothers insisted on a screen test before allowing The Bodyguard to go. They sought evidence that Houston could play the part of Rachel Marin, a dazzling celebrity entangled in a perilous romance. That test turned out to be one of Whitney's most intimidating experiences in her professional life. And it turned into a memory that Kevin Costner will always cherish. Doubting her seems absurd at first glance. Whitney's voice had already filled stadiums, ruled the charts, and sold millions of albums. But she was a novice in the art of acting. She confided in interviewers and friends that she was afraid people would follow her about and undermine her before she could develop. She acknowledged that she felt unworthy, and that she would look foolish if she appeared in front of the cameras. The thought of quiet or criticism was a terrible idea for a lady whose life had been molded by praise. But Kevin Costner remained steadfast in his conviction. He witnessed Whitney's struggles in the trailer on the day of the screen test. She put off going out, worrying over how she looked, and tearing herself apart in front of the mirror. She appeared to find 1,000 faults with herself, Costner recounted later. He didn't care about her appearance, hairstyle, or attire. The fact that she appeared so little at that moment was what devastated him, as if a celebrity had been brought to self-doubt. Another catastrophe occurred when Whitney eventually appeared in front of the cameras. In order to make herself look more attractive, she had altered her makeup during a break and applied a heavier look. Under the harsh studio lights, the makeup started to melt as she talked in a low, almost contrite voice, leaving her face streaked and even more self-conscious. Only a few minutes into the test, the crew had to end it. Walking away could have been enough to embarrass anyone else. Kevin, however, recalled the incident as something more profound: a window into the frail heart of a lady who bore the weight of her celebrity. Costner admitted years later that he was thinking about manipulating the audition at the time. He had considered telling the studio that any mishaps were an exceptional acting decision, and that everything Whitney performed on camera would be excellent. He even imagined making the slightest mistake in order to allow her to play the role. He did not, however, finish. Despite his intense desire to shield her at that precise time, he understood that doing so would be unjust to the filmmakers, the studio, or even Whitney. She needed to earn it. She must have known she deserved it. So he chose to do something else rather than cover for her. She didn't have to be flawless, he reassured her. Already her voice, her presence, and her genuineness were more than sufficient. She was already Rachel Marin in his eyes. She simply had to accept it. Looking back on that day, Costner said, he characterized it as a pivotal moment. That day he saw Whitney as a woman who longed to succeed rather than as that untouchable star who was loved by millions. Under the glitz and glamour of achievement, she was frail, weak, and vulnerable. He believed that she was so appealing to the camera because of her inherent fragility. The recollection of the screen test remained with them as The Bodyguard's production started. Whitney was relying on Kevin, but she was still anxious. He was battling for her to believe in herself after he had fought to have her cast. Later on, the world would witness the stunning outcome of what only Costner truly comprehended at the time: how close she was to leaving. But neither would understand that the same fears that threatened their confidence wall would turn into the unadulterated genius of her performance. As the cameras rolled, it became evident that there was a magic between Costner and Houston that could never be measured by a test, on-screen magic. When The Bodyguard debuted in 1992, viewers saw something uncommon: chemistry that was not scriptable. Whitney Houston and Kevin Costner did more than just act. They established an electrifying connection that made viewers question whether art had transcended into the real world. There was a reason behind that magic. It began with Costner's belief in Whitney, her unvarnished vulnerability, and her innovative decisions, which transformed a straightforward thriller into a 1990s cultural phenomenon. The idea was simple. Costner plays Frank Farmer, a stoic bodyguard who defends Rachel Marin, a Houston figure, from a stalker. It was a classic clash on paper. A dazzling diva meets a hardened professional. In danger, romance blossoms. Their portrayal of their parts was what made it memorable. Houston's emotional intensity was counterbalanced by Costner's controlled reserve, resulting in a love tale that felt genuine rather than contrived. Uncertainties lurked behind the scenes. Some executives questioned whether viewers would accept an interracial romance in a mainstream blockbuster, while others were concerned that Houston's inexperience may detract from the movie. But as the movie went on, those uncertainties disappeared. Every look, every hesitancy, every hug between them was significant. Later, Costner clarified that what was observed was not deception. Whitney was telling the truth. Because of her tenderness, longing, and fears, Rachel became a character that audiences could relate to. Music was the most famous manifestation of the magic. Houston was originally scheduled to perform What Becomes of the Broken-Hearted, but the team had to change their plans when it was utilized in another movie. Costner boldly proposed I Will Always Love You by Dolly Parton. Costner maintained that it was the ideal choice for a pop powerhouse like Whitney, despite the fact that many people found it strange. He even supported the now famous a cappella opening, believing it would highlight her power and fragility. The rest is history now. Whitney not only made The Bodyguard better, but she also completely redefined what a movie soundtrack is. With an album that has sold about 45 million copies, the song is likely the most well-known ballad of all time, and the best-selling soundtrack of all time. Globally, the movie brought in over $400 million. The unquestionable chemistry between Costner and Houston was another aspect of the plot that the critics clearly agreed upon, notwithstanding their disagreements. For Costner, success also meant humility. Many performers may have portrayed Frank Farmer, he frequently remarked. But Rachel Marin couldn't have been anyone else. Whitney was responsible for giving the movie its spirit and turning a pretty traditional thriller into a classic. The audience seemed to concur. They thought Frank liked Rachel in addition to witnessing him defend her. They were sensitive to Rachel's fear, pride, and need for approval, in addition to seeing her as a well-known individual in danger. This created a hazy line between truth and fantasy, which led to a lot of conjecture about whatever was going on between Costner and Houston after the camera stopped. The rumors intensified as the film was released. It was believed that the two were more than just actors. The performers' intense on-screen chemistry extended into their relationship, or maybe something more that lasted for a very long time. In the end, The Bodyguard was more than just a film when the titles rolled. With two actors whose chemistry could never be faked, it turned into a love tale that spilt off screen. It will always be regarded by viewers as one of Hollywood's best love stories. For Costner and Houston, it marked the beginning of a relationship that was both unforgettable and intimate. Beyond the red carpets and box office results, Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston forged a close relationship that was expressed through letters, silences, and stories that showed how much they meant to each other, silent messages and private bonds. Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston delivered the world a fantastical love story on screen. Off-screen, their shared experience was more subdued, more difficult to characterize, and possibly more potent due to its constraint. They developed a private relationship based on mutual respect, faith, and understanding. While the public conjectured about romance, there were signs in that link, such as unanswered letters, that showed how much Costner loved her even after the job was over. Their shared history, which few were aware of, was what initially brought them together. They were both brought up in the church. Growing up in a Baptist home, Costner frequently made jokes about skulking off during sermons or getting into trouble with his siblings. Houston's voice, which would make her a worldwide legend, was shaped by her more somber background at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark. But after exchanging tales, the two discovered points of agreement. Together they realized how faith had influenced them both, and Whitney laughed at his stories of mischievous childhood behavior. It provided them with a language of conviction and memory that went beyond Hollywood. But there was worry underneath the laughter. Whitney's battles with substance usage were widely acknowledged by the late 1990s. Missed performances and declining health were reported by tabloids. Costner, who maintained contact, said that he was always apprehensive. He wasn't merely an absentee former co-star. He was driven to make contact. He started writing letters at that point. Costner has admitted that he didn't enjoy writing, but he forced himself to do it since he thought Whitney needed to hear from a reliable source. These weren't warnings or lectures. When she doubted herself, they served as a reminder that she was appreciated and that someone still thought highly of her. He hoped his remarks would provide a bridge back to the young woman he had soothed on a studio, piercing the cacophony of fame and addiction. All signs point to the fact that she never received the letters. Costner never received a response. He could not tell if Whitney saw them, ignored them, or even read them. He was troubled by that quiet. For a man who had once told her she was good enough, seeing her fall into self-doubt and self-destruction must have been heartbreaking. Writing itself was an act that counted. Instead of engaging, Costner chose to keep reaching out, even though he could have turned away like so many others did. Whitney was much than just a friend or co-star to him. She had been vulnerable with him, and to treasure that memory meant to reach out to her, even when she didn't say anything. Fans have been speculating about their relationship's nature for ages. Were they confidants, buddies, or something else entirely? Their relationship was never sensationalized by Costner. Instead, he unveiled something enduring, a dedication that prevailed during the years of quiet. His remarks may eventually come to suggest that their mutual trust, their shared laughing, and the letters he wrote to her all suggested a connection that was much too deep to be conveyed through simple rumors. Their story is made more poignant by the thought of Kevin Costner writing letters to Whitney Houston, letters that might still be unread. It implies that the pauses between uttered and unsaid words were where they were connected. What they communicated was real, delicate, and private in a field that is based on headlines and performance. A relationship that went beyond the bodyguard. And it was that connection, preserved in letters and memories, that inspired him to stand in front of the world and give a final, heartfelt speech when her life ended way too soon. The funeral eulogy. The world appeared to halt when Whitney Houston died in February 2012. Outside of record stores and churches, fans congregated. Her soaring melodies were rebroadcast by news channels, and tributes from all around the world were received. However, one of the most poignant moments occurred during her funeral, which was held at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, the same location where she sung for the first time as a youngster. Standing in front of her loved ones, friends, and millions of people around the world, Kevin Costner, her co-star from The Bodyguard, gave a eulogy that left everyone in the room silent. Few anticipated Costner's remarks. He wasn't a musician or a member of Whitney's close circle in her later years. But what he said showed a really intimate connection. He made no pretentious remarks. He talked like a man recalling a comrade, a partner, someone who had made an impression he could hardly describe. Costner described how The Bodyguard almost failed the screen test. He talked about Whitney's anxiety, and how she requested him to leave the room so she could get ready, before coming back with more makeup that melted in the light. Recalling her brittle voice, he acknowledged that she merely desired to appear her best. Costner claimed that he witnessed the true Whitney. In that moment, not the beloved superstar, but a young lady who was questioning her value. His statements touched mourners because they exposed the humanity underlying the myth. He did, however, also remind everyone of her victories. He insisted The Bodyguard's success was hers, telling the congregation, "You weren't just good enough. You were great. You, Whitney, were the only person who could have been Rachel Marin, although many other famous men could have played my role." It was a statement that took her above the level of stardom, and confirmed her unique genius, at a time when everyone else was lamenting the loss. The most poignant part was probably when he assured her that she had been more than adequate, speaking to her as if she were still alive. She had been excellent. The seal of formality was broken by simple words, even if they seemed like they were part of a ritual. It sounded more like a discourse that went on from life to death across the border than a eulogy. Costner considered their relationship outside of the set as well. They had discussed religion and purity, how he grew up in the church, and how fame could be both a boon and a bane. He reminded everyone that beneath the attractive exterior, there was a woman who needed acceptance and comforting laughter, just as much as everybody else. In an attempt to overcome his feelings, he called Whitney the woman in heaven, who was making God himself question how he could have made something so flawless. It was a heartfelt and beautiful farewell, the type that only someone who had known her well could offer. Then he said his last words. The headlines thundered with those words. "Whitney, don't worry. You'll be sufficient." This moving, heartbreaking message marked a turning point in the service. It brought back memories of their early collaboration. He made her stand tall whenever she doubted herself. And now, 20 years later, he was prepared to offer her the final consolation. A consolation that sounded almost like reconciliation. Costner's eulogy for Whitney Houston effectively rewrote Houston's story for everyone in attendance that day, reminding them that beneath the glitz and glamour of celebrity was a somewhat bruised and marred soul that had yearned for approval, and that one man who had always seen her for the greatness she was unable to see in herself. The world was taken aback by Costner's silent comments, which reverberated long after the church doors had closed. Despite the musical and tribute-filled service, Kevin's admission in public, the world replayed Kevin Costner's eulogy of Whitney Houston in the days following her death. His remarks were honest, sincere, and unvarnished. The confession he included in his homage, as well as the emotion he demonstrated, astounded many. Typically reserved and measured, Costner referred to Whitney as his one true love. Decades of conjecture were rekindled by that discovery, which made people question the depth of their relationship. Whether Frank Farmer and Rachel Moran's on-screen chemistry, translated to real life, has been a topic of speculation since the 1992 premiere of The Bodyguard. Both performers avoided the constant speculation of fans. Whitney never indulged in gossip, instead concentrating on her own struggles and profession. Costner ignored the chit-chat as well, portraying their relationship as one of friendship and deep respect. However, When he referred to her as his one true love at the funeral, something changed. After 20 years of silence, Costner finally spoke. He gave no explanation, but it was clear how powerful those remarks were. Some saw it as poetic words intended to pay tribute to her. For others, it was an admission that their relationship went beyond friendship, possibly in ways she never discussed while she was alive. Context was added by further interviews. Costner clarified that truth, not controversy, was what his love was all about. He talked about how brilliant and delicate she was, and how terrible it was to watch her doubt herself, in spite of her amazing talents. He said that he had written her letters in an attempt to console her amid her struggles with addiction. But those letters, which were intimate but unfinished, remained unanswered. The public's reaction was instantaneous and appeared to be divided. Some sensed his honesty at first, viewing his admission as the only sincere acknowledgement of Whitney's influence on him. Others questioned whether such remarks should have been kept confidential, and questioned the timing. But one fact was very noteworthy. Costner had revealed his sadness by removing his expertly constructed Hollywood armor. Costner said that he wasn't sure if he should even come and talk. He questioned whether his statements would be misunderstood and whether his presence was welcome. Ultimately, he honored Whitney in the only manner he knew how, by addressing her as if she were still present. There was no rehearsal in his confession. It came naturally, from the same impulse that so many years ago made him reassure her before her anxious screen test. What really sticks out is that Costner's remarks primarily revealed something about him, rather than confirming the rumor of a love connection. In his mind, Whitney's recollection was given a lot of compassion after those years in a field where appearance was crucial. He didn't say anything controversial. They were expressions of gratitude, pain, and regret for what was never. Fans have dissected every word in Costner's eulogy and other interviews over the years. Was it in the direction of platonic suffering, love, or something in the middle? The full tale might never be revealed to the world. It's true that Costner, who was always wary of the spotlight, decided to let his heart open for one moment. And by doing this, he reminded the world in addition to making a confession. The best love tales are sometimes the ones that are silently carried in the voids between words, letters, and memories, and are never fulfilled. A legacy of sorrow and love. Kevin Costner did more than simply end a chapter when he stood in that New York church and gave Whitney Houston his whole heart. Their relationship was inscribed in cultural memory by him. His remarks stuck around, being rerun on TV, discussed in publications, and analyzed by admirers who continue to question what was really going on between them. Their legacy is undoubtedly based on both regret and love. Regret for what was left undone, and love for what they made together. Whitney was much than just a co-star to Costner. He frequently referred to her as the bodyguard's soul, which is why the movie struck such a deep chord. He preserved her memory long after the movie was finished, writing messages that might never have been read and referring to her with awe. It is remarkable that in a career full with honors, he frequently brought up Whitney's name while reminiscing about significant events. That demonstrates both her skill and the impression she made on his heart. But there was regret in his remarks. He regretted not being able to prevent her addiction, that no one responded to his letters, that a person so bright was unable to recognize her own light. His assertion that she was adequate during her burial felt more like a last-ditch effort to reassure her than a eulogy, something he hoped she had accepted while she was still living. Costner's devotion gave Whitney's story a new dimension for her admirers. The news was dominated by her tumultuous marriage to Bobby Brown and her battles with celebrity. However, Costner saw her as delicate, vulnerable, and in need of defense. His viewpoint served as a reminder to the public that beneath the icon was a human being who was both endowed with abilities and tormented by doubt. Through The Bodyguard, their on-screen coupling has had a profound and enduring cultural impact. The on-screen relationship defied stereotypes by demonstrating that love is stronger than expectations, background, and race. And even after 3 decades, one of the most lucid depictions of commitment in a film is the scene where Frank Farmer chooses Rachel. Thus, Whitney's legacy is entwined with the event and the soundtrack that defined an era. The bigger story, however, lies in what was never said. Unanswered letters, never had any conversations. The future that never came. Costner regrets leaving that legacy as a reminder of how short human relationships can be, with even the closest ties breaking down when faced with circumstances, pride, or distance. Unresolved relationships can occasionally be the most significant. Whitney will always be her voice to the world. Living rooms and arenas will continue to be filled with the best ballads, performances, and songs. The laugh they shared over church stories, the anxious glance she gave him prior to her screen test, and the faith she put in him when she doubted herself were all various aspects of her legacy for Costner. His affection for her and his sadness for her were rooted in these private moments that were not captured on camera. The story is ultimately not about a well-known romance. It conveys the reality that certain individuals enter our lives and make a lasting impression that is difficult to remove. For actor Kevin Costner, Whitney Houston was one of those individuals. His admissions during her funeral, his laments over what might have been, and his unwavering adoration will only guarantee that their union will live on in the silent memory rather than in gossip columns. And their narrative still speaks louder than words could in that silence. In addition to leaving us with more questions than answers, Kevin Costner's remarks at 69 also revealed an unavoidable fact. How do you feel about his admission of guilt? Please remember to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for more videos like this one if you liked it. Watch the following video that appears on your screen. You should not miss it.